What's up, everybody? In this video, we're going to be covering some foundational N8N nodes. We're going to be talking about JavaScript object notation, commonly abbreviated as JSON for short. We're going to be talking about different field types in N8N. And then finally, we're going to wrap it all up with how data is represented on this platform and how you can best make use of it. Without further ado, let's dive into it. So if you guys have seen some of the other videos on my channel, you'll know that I put a very big emphasis on building things practically. I don't really care much for the academic side of things. I prefer we just dive right in and then teach some of these concepts by actually putting nodes together, making workflows that you could sell for business purposes or implement into your own companies. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We can't really get away from doing some of the academic stuff with JSON just because, if you don't know JavaScript object notation, you are going to have to learn some things like types and objects and what variables are and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're going to be learning all of these concepts down here by building two workflows. The first workflow is up here. And essentially what this does is it feeds in a bunch of lead data to artificial intelligence. This is the Google Sheet containing 4 leads with a bunch of information here. So we're going to feed in this information to AI. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have AI generate a subject line for an email, an icebreaker for an email, an elevator pitch for an email, a call to action, and then a postscript, little PS sign. The idea here is this is a real workflow that people pay me for, and so these are the ones that I want to start with. Essentially, this will allow you to customize email outreach so that it seems as if you've done a lot of research into the person, which is very, very valuable in a business setting. The second workflow is a little bit more peculiar, I guess. There's this service out there called Source of Sources. It used to be called Help Reporter at Haro. Basically, the way that it works is this lovely gentleman here, Peter, will send you a bunch of information, basically where journalists are looking for professionals in a certain industry to weigh in on some developments. And then if you're a professional in the industry and you give the journalists some, good info, they can actually tag you and then use you in an article. It's a quick and easy way to basically get listed in a magazine or some very authoritative data source. And what this system does is it basically gets an email like this, then it pumps in the titles into AI, does some cool processing, and then we actually write a draft of that email as if we were an expert in that field, which all you need to do is just quickly review, give a once over, edit a little bit, and then send off to journalists. There's another system that I've sold a number of times, and so I want the videos that I create on N8N to be practical in nature. I want them to be on things that you're probably going to be using for business purposes. So these are the two systems that we're going to be building. They're cool systems and all, but for the purpose of this video, I kind of want to build them from scratch. So why don't we just exit out of that puppy? And then, let me just do one thing actually. I'm just going to copy over the prompt here because if I don't, the prompt can be kind of annoying to write. I don't really want to take up a ton of our time. So that's the prompt that we're going to be using for AI. And for the rest of this, we'll just get rid of that. Okay, the very first concept I want to cover are fixed fields and expression fields. I'm going to be basically convincing you to just use expressions all the time, and I'm also going to show you how to map different field inputs, because the last time that we jumped around at N8N, we built a couple of workflows, but I was sort of glancing over a couple of the some of the nuance behind fields and stuff like that. So for the purposes of demonstration, it's going to be pretty easy. We're just going to build the first system out by clicking a button. That is going to get a bunch of data from our Google Sheet, and then we're just going to pass all of that data in kind of row by row into AI. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but ultimately something that is very useful, and you'll find yourself doing quite a bit if you do cold outreach. So first things first, I'm just going to press tab. That's going to open up this trigger thing on the left-hand side, and then, if you type trigger here, if you type trig, I should say, you'll see a ton of options here. You could either do that, or you could just scroll down to the bottom where it says add another trigger and then press trigger manually. Either is fine, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to do that. And basically what I want to do is the second that I run this trigger, when I click on test workflow, I want to get all of the rows and all the data in my Google Sheet. So I'm going to go up here to nodes. I'm just going to type in sheet. We're going to get Google Sheets. Now what I'm going to do is, if you scroll down here, you'll see that there's this one node called Get Rows in Sheets. That's what I'm going to click on. Now I've already done a connection before. What you're going to have to do if you want to connect to your Google Sheets account is go to Create New Connection. Now because I'm on the cloud hosted offering, and keep in mind, if you're not on the cloud hosted offering, these sorts of connections are a little bit more difficult. You have to go to Google Cloud Console and get set up there. But because I'm on the cloud hosted offering, all I need to do is click Sign In with Google over here, and I'll actually go connect to my email account, and then it'll create a credential for me, which is pretty handy. So you can see it's saying it already has some access just because I've already done this connection. But for the purposes of the demo, I just wanted to show you guys what that looks like. And then I'm just going to save this connection here with a name so that it's just nice and organized. Okay, and what we want to do is we just want to grab this Google Sheet up here, right? So in N8N, there are a variety of ways to do this, but I'm going to be looking for a document. sorry, a sheet within a document, my bad. The document we're going to want to select is from the list, and we're actually going to go down and we're going to choose this one called leads, comma space, January 27th, 2025. So as you can see, we have already manually found that, okay? And then the specific subsheet that we want is this sheet 1, because I guess that's the only one that we have here. So I'm just going to click on this. It's going to actually do an API call to Google Sheets. It's going to find that there's only sheet 1 here. Then I can give it a click, and then voila. Let me just run test step, and let's see what happens when I click test. Okay, great. So I've obfuscated this data. This data is not actually one-for-one whoever this person is. I've gone through and I've like renamed them and stuff like that just for privacy purposes. But as we see on the right-hand side here, we have a bunch of output. And we can see the output in a variety of ways. Tabular, JSON, schema. Most people in N8N, they like the schema look because it just kind of compresses the information nicely. It's a little bit easier for them to see. I'm a little zoomed in here too. Yeah, you know, normally like you see most of the node variables, which is pretty handy. But this JSON one over here, this is really intimidating for a lot of people. And so we're going to cover this in detail. I'm going to show you exactly how you read JSON, what all those things mean. But I just want you guys to know that for the remainder of this course, I'm going to be using primarily the JSON and the schema view, but I'm actually going to tend towards JSON. And the reason why I'm going to be tending towards JSON is because like JSON says all the same stuff that the schema view does anyway. But unfortunately, part of the way you learn JSON is just by kind of staring at it a lot and squinting at it and kind of inherently and intuitively understanding the formatting. If we're going to be looking at outputs all day anyway, we might as well kind of get, you know, kill two birds with one stone. All of the same data in JSON is represented in schema anyway. It's just instead of like the quotes around key names and stuff, you just have sort of this light gray box alongside like a type sign here. So I guess the point I'm making is we might as well double up and just learn how JSON looks while we're proceeding with the course. And that's why I'm going to be using this, even if it looks a little bit more intimidating. Don't worry too much about it. Okay, so I said that I talk about fields, right? So fields in N8N, just as I was covering in the previous video, are stuff like this, right? We have this sort of center node config option here for our Google Sheets node. You know, one of the fields we selected was this YouTube credential to connect with. Another one was this resource, sheet within document, operation, document, sheet. But I want you to know that these are actually all representable in code as well. So as you see over here, we have two different types of fields. One's called fixed and the other is called expression. So by default, just to keep your life easy and to not like freak you the hell out, especially if you're like a newbie in N8N, they're going to keep all of the fields to the fixed type. But if you click on expression, you'll see that things are now a little bit different. Notice how when I went to fixed, we had like a nice little, you know, it said leads January 27, 2025. And then when I jump over to expression, now we have some big long ID. So what is this? Why is it structured that way? And what exactly does any of this mean? Well, if we pay close attention, this ID field here, 1, lowercase o, t, r, a, t, 4, c, capital C, and then the rest of this big long ID string over here. If we go to our Google Sheet, what you'll see is that that ID string actually matches the URL of our Google Sheet exactly. And this takes me to a wider point. Most of the time, sorry about that, most of the time, anytime you're accessing a resource on some API or even just on the internet, they will store the ID of the resource, which is sort of like a hidden representation of it, in the URL. So, you know, one of the examples that I provided the other day was I went over to ClickUp, right? And then inside of ClickUp, I like searched around for some record. I'm just going to click on this here. This was my old content calendar. How to send 1,000 cold Instagram DMs per day. That was one of the things I wanted to do. This right up here is the ID of the record, 86B27A7ZM, right? If I wanted to do something with this through their API, this is the ID of the record that I would be calling. So I want you to know that like ClickUp, Monday, like even Gmail, basically every service out there, they will store the ID of the thing you want to modify or update or whatever, just in the URL. So if ever a field asks for an ID, you can almost always just go to the URL of the thing on the actual user, you know, on the actual app, like the user interface. Then you could find that URL thing and you just hard code it in here. Okay, so that's just a brief look at some of the differences between fixed and expression. Basically fix a lot of the time, just to keep you guys, to make sure that like we're on the same page here. Fix is just the simpler version. Then expression is sort of what's actually going on under the hood. So, you know, N8N just defaults to fix like it just did here, because it doesn't really want to scare you away. But in order to really unlock the value of N8N, we have to go to the expression field. And I'm going to show you here why, you know, I basically just use expression for everything at this point. Okay, so looking at the output here, what we have is we fed in, we clicked, and then we got a click event, and that was counted as one item. And so N8N actually shows you the number of items that are passed on. Then we pumped that click event into Google Sheets, and then that click event outputted 4 items. So now we're working off of array data or tabular data, which I'll cover in a moment. But essentially with these 4 items now, what we want to do is we want to pass each of these items into artificial intelligence, and we want to have AI tell us something about it before writing some cold email copy for us to insert into an email, or maybe we could just send a Gmail directly or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button. I'll zoom out a little bit. What we want is if you go down to advanced AI, we want this OpenAI node. And specifically what I want is I want the message model. So if you've seen me connect this in the previous video, you'll notice that, in order to create a new credential, you actually have to go and you have to find the API key from OpenAI in order to do this. This is pretty simple to do. You just type platform.openai.com/ I think it's like account/API or something. You have to click on this button here to open the documentation to tell you more. But anyway, you can basically just create an API key for N8N. It's very simple and very straightforward to do so. And I've already done this, and then I've called it YouTube. So I'm just going to use that credential just so I don't have to leak another API key. Now, again, we have a ton of fields. We have resource, text, operation, message and model, from list, choose. Keep in mind, the fields are again fixed, right? It's trying to make it really easy for us to select GPT-4o. So I'm just going to go down here, type GPT-4. And then I'm just going to click 4o. And now we actually enter in the text that we're interested in, okay? And this is really where you're going to start learning the differences between the fixed and the expression. So fixed is just, it's what the name implies. It's fixed. It's text. You can't make this dynamic. You can't add variables to it. It's the simplest way to get up and running with a node, which is why N8N will default to fixed. But over the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to convince you to basically always just use expression. Okay, so I saved my prompt somewhere else. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a system prompt. So I'm going to go down here to system. I'll just say you are a helpful, intelligent writing assistant. Usually the way that you will do AI calls is you will have a system prompt first, then you'll have a user prompt after, and the user prompt is where you actually give it the instructions you want it to do. So, in our case, it's going to be like, hey, I want you to write a template. I want you to write a bunch of fields that are templates that we're going to insert into a cold email later. And then after, you have the choice to provide a bunch of examples. So you could provide an assistant prompt, and then you could do another user prompt, assistant prompt, user prompt, assistant prompt. You can do that however many times you want just to show it how things work. For the purpose of this example, I'm just going to be providing a single user prompt. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm just going to copy over my prompt below. Let me paste that in, and let's just read through this together. Your task is to personalize an email. You'll do this by taking as input a prospect LinkedIn profile, then editing 5 templates for different sections of the email: subject line, icebreaker, elevator pitch, call to action, and a PS or postscript field. If you're unfamiliar with postscript, at the bottom of an email, I'll just say, PS, I really miss you. Can't wait to see you. That's what a postscript field is. We basically want AI to automate that for us because there's a lot of value in making those postscript fields seem human written. Anyway, now we're offering it some templates. Subject line, hey, name, I think I have something for you, and then cool thing about them that we discovered. Let's just go unique thing about them or their company. Icebreaker, I know you're doing thing, and I've been following related thing for a while, so I figured it made sense to chat. Next, elevator pitch. The TLDR, I think I can add $5K a month to their paraphrase business with a few automated systems. And then there's a call to action. I just did this for a very similar industry company, and we hit 28,350 in a few months. They do related things, so I'm very confident I can duplicate this at minimum. Would be 100% risk-free. I'd guarantee at least 20 appointments booked, or you wouldn't have to pay. Pretty neat, huh? So then I give it a bunch of guidelines, and feel free to pause the video if you want to take a look at it. The last thing that I do is then I say respond in JSON using this format. And if you've at all used AI before, you'll see this JSON thing come up again. JSON. And we're going to cover that in just a few minutes, so buckle up. Okay, great. So we've given it a ton of instructions in the first user prompt. So what I do next is I just give it a user prompt with the actual body of the input that I want to give. And if you think back here, what this Google Sheet is, just so you guys are all on the same page as me, is I've basically gone and I've scraped a bunch of data about random people on the internet that fulfill some criteria that I have. So chief executive officer, director of demand generation, director of marketing, business development manager, or some dentistry person or something, okay? And then I have a bunch of fields here. One of the fields I have is I have a summary field where people basically write their own summary of who they are and what they care about. We have a ton of other fields as well. We have company location. We have a description of their title. We have, their industry. And the cool part about AI is you could just feed this into a large language model and have it automate something for you, have it write something customized. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. The thing is though, right? How do I get dynamic data into this? So I don't know, let's say one of the things I want to feed the AI the person's full name. Notice how this is fixed here, right? If I just typed Amy Wathaby, then that means that every time I do an API call that includes their full name, I'm going to have it say Amy Wathaby. This is fixed. It's the same thing every time. If you want to make this dynamic, what you have to do, there are a variety of ways to do this, but I'm going to use the expression field, is you have to click expression, and then you drag the field that you want, and then you drop it. And you'll see that when I do that, we've now just inserted a little bit of code. This is in N8N's code format, the equivalent of the variable that we just pulled from our pinned data or our data from the input. And what you see down here is this is separated into two halves. The top half is the code representation. We said full name, just in like regular characters, and I can manipulate this how I want, then a colon, then a space, and then there's curly bracket, space, $JSON.FULLNAME, space, and then a right curly bracket. Up here you have the code representation, and then notice that underneath here we have result. It actually shows us what the data that we're pulling in is from the input, which was right over here. Now, I'm going to be feeding it a bunch of data in order to have this personalized. I'm going to be feeding in their full name, I'm going to be feeding in the summary, I'm going to be feeding in the title, but I just want you guys to notice how these variables change between the full name, between the summary, between the title. And you're going to notice that there's kind of a pattern there. Okay, so full name was that. We'll go title. I'm just going to drag this in, paste it in. Notice how the first one was JSON.full-name. Second one was JSON.title, right? Let's see what the third one is. Let's go down here to company. Company, if I drag and drop this, it now says JSON.company. You know, the C is capitalized. That looks a little bit new, but for the most part, it's still pretty self-explanatory. It seems to me, if I were an alien staring at this and looking to try and figure out what the pattern here is, it seems to me that every single time I drag and drop one of these fields in there, it says $JSON dot and then the name of the variable. And the name of the variable tends to be whatever I'm looking at on the left-hand side here. So what if, hypothetically, instead of me doing this drag and drop bullshit, what if I were to actually just try and write this myself? Well, let's see what happens. If I zoom in a little bit, just so we could all see, if I go curly bracket, you'll see that I'm now entering sort of the next level up in N8N. I'm now manipulating like code or JavaScript, their version of JavaScript, a JMES path, I believe it's called, directly in the expression editor. And this is where N8N gets really powerful because you also have a ton of built-in methods and built-in ways you can manipulate this data with literally one click, one little button tap without having to drag and drop all these modules everywhere. You can just do so in the convenience of your own field editor. Okay, so the very first thing that pops up is it says suggested JSON. If I just type that and then I press enter, you'll see that now I have access to all of the fields that I had access to earlier. So instead of me dragging and dropping all this stuff, what if I just wanted to write the word summary here to grab this? If I just type summary, notice how this now turned green, and we've added all of that information down here to the results tab. All of that information is here. How cool is that? So now, if I want to continue on, I'll go industry, I'll go $JSON industry, voila. Next, we're going to go company location. I'm going to go JSON.company location, voila. Notice how it's trying to autofill this for me, right? I'll go title description, $JSON dot to title description, voila. And I basically have the ability to do this infinitely, depending on how nested the data is in the JSON structure of the input. I'll run through how to do all of that in a moment, but I just want you guys to sort of pattern match, look from the outside in. How am I actually referencing all these variables from previous calls? Okay, great. So to me, as somebody that does this sort of personalization all the time, if we click on this little button here, we can actually open up, we could see all of the code and all of the text. To me, somebody that does this all the time, this looks like sufficient amount of information for us to personalize an email off of. So I'm actually just going to call it there, and we're actually going to just run this puppy. But basically what's going to happen is we're just going to be feeding in all of this stuff to artificial intelligence, and we're going to be saying, hey man, based off of all of Amy's info, I want you to tell me something about her, and then I want you to write an email based off of the template that I provided you earlier. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and press output content as JSON, give this a click. And then I'm not going to modify any of the options here either, but I'm just going to click test step. Okay, so what just happened, or what is occurring as we speak, is I'm feeding in 4 items to OpenAI. I'm basically blitzkrieg going item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. And it's happening all at once before they show us the output of each of these. So that's why it takes a little bit longer than usual, but this is more or less what's happening under the hood. Okay, great. And we just received an output. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom out a little bit just so we could see this in completeness. And I'll use schema for now just to make it easier for you guys and kind of wraps all in one line here. Sorry, wraps, you don't have to like scroll all the way to the right to see it. But let's take a look. The output was content, subject line, icebreaker, elevator pitch, call to action, PS. So it actually went and it outputted 5 fields for us. And we can use those fields in future nodes very easily. The first thing on the subject line was, hey, Amy, think I have something for you regarding boosting online strategies. The icebreaker was, I know you're leading creative web solutions and net directives and been following innovative marketing strategies for a while, so I figured it made sense to chat. The TLDR, I think you can add $5K a month to your client-focused internet marketing efforts with a few automated systems. The call to action, I just did this for a very similar IT consulting company. We hit this amount. They do e-commerce and marketing too. How cool is that? So I'm very confident I can duplicate this at minimum. Would be 100% risk-free. I'd guarantee at least 20 appointments booked you wouldn't pay. PS, even if we just chat, I'd love to hear about what you're doing with video marketing. That sounds pretty cool to me, right? If I were to receive an email like this, aside from the subject line, which is a little bit vague, boosting online strategies, but you can't fault the AI for not being perfect 100% of the time. Even if I were to get something like this, it would seem as if like the person that's reaching out to me did their research at minimum and is reaching out to me sort of in a personalized, customized way as opposed to just like blasting me a big sequence. So what else do I want to do with this? Well, if you guys, remember back to the beginning of the video, there weren't just 2 or 3 nodes here. There was a node that updated the Google Sheet. So I'm going to show you how to update the Google Sheet. Then what we're actually going to do is we're going to take this one step further, and I'm actually going to draft some emails to send to Amy and the rest of the people here. So actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here and pin this output. The reason why is because if you think about it, me calling OpenAI there, that was a little bit like computationally expensive. It took me a little bit of time. I don't actually want to have to rerun that over and over and over again. Pinning the data just allows me to capture that, cache it, and now I can just like test all subsequent nodes using that, which is very straightforward. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to update this Google Sheet. So I'm going to click here, search nodes, I'll type sheets, and what I want to do is I want to update row and sheet. I'm going to select my credentials again, YouTube. The resource will be sheet within document. The operation will be update row. Let's, instead of using the fix, let's actually just use the expression so I could show you how this works. Just going to grab the ID of this field or of this sheet, paste that in there. Voila. Then the sheet that I'm going to be picking is just going to be sheet 1. So notice that the top here, we use the expression field view, and then down here we just use the fix. So it actually used the expression field view to do an API call to their backend to discover that sheet 1 was the only sheet. And then we selected it there. We could also just feed in an expression. And as you see, when you go from fixed to expression for the specific sheet type, it just says GID equals 0. GID equals 0 just refers to the first sheet, basically here. So we're always going to be selecting the first sheet. But anyway, for this, I'm actually going to go from list, and then I'll just go sheet 1. Keep this simpler. Okay, now it's going to be fetching a bunch of columns for us. And basically, in order to do this update, what we have to do is we have to grab the data from the previous nodes, and then we have to update every single column here with that data. If I were just to scroll all the way down and update the columns that I care about, like subject, icebreaker, elevator pitch, call to action, postscript, it would just leave the rest of these blank, which is kind of annoying if I'm being honest, but I don't want the rest of these to be blank and these to be filled. I want all of this data because I'm just going to import this into some cold email tool later, right? So what we have to do is now, this is kind of the initial idea behind this system, I'm going to go through and I'm going to update every single one of these using the expression tab, and then I'm going to be pulling data in, but I'm not going to be pulling data in from here. I'm going to be pulling data in from one node behind it. So you guys could see what it looks like in code, basically. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is we just need a column to match on. In order for the automation to know which row should be updated, we have to find data that includes that email. So I'm going to go email. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here to the previous node, not the OpenAI node, but the Google Sheets node, the one that like first listed us the data. Then I'm going to drag this, feed that in there. And you'll notice that the format now looks different than it did before. Previously, we had a $JSON dot item, right? Now we have a $, and then a bracket, a single quote sign, the name of the node, another single quote sign, and then another bracket. And then we go .item, .json, .email. So when you access node data from more than one node back, you have to use this new format here, which is kind of annoying, but you'll see how easy it is when we just like kind of copy, paste, and spam our way through. So how about this civility? I'm going to go to expression. I'm going to paste this in. Then instead of email, I'm just going to go civility. How about this first name? Let's paste that in there. We'll go first name. How about this first name suggestion? Paste that in there, go expression, go first name suggestion. How about the last name? I'm going to paste this in there, go last name. How about the full name? I'm going to paste that in there, go expression, we'll go full name. How about the title? I'm going to paste this in there, I'll go title. Profile URL. So you can see, we're picking up the pace a little bit. It's getting a little bit faster and faster. Company. Company, a legal name. Company phone. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut to me having actually filled all this stuff out just for brevity. Okay, elevator pitch, call to action, looking good. And then last but not least, we'll do, I think it was just PS or was it postscript? Yeah, sorry, it was just PS for that. This is the one situation which the column name is a little bit different from the variable name down here. Okay, now that we're done with that, let's just quickly cover just some little differences here in the formatting, just so we can get a run up on the JSON, which I'm about to teach you. If you scroll all the way up here, you'll see that some of these, or actually most of these, followed this format. It was, oops, sorry about that. Let's go over here. It was curly brace, $, the name of the node in single quotes, .item, .json, whatever the value was, .summary in this case. This one was .regular company URL. This one down here was .vmid. You'll notice that a few of these are actually a little bit different. A few of these, in particular the ones with spaces, like the variable names with spaces, they weren't just the name. It was a square bracket, single quote, and then the name of the variable that we were referencing. The reason why we had to do this instead of just doing the dot and then the variable name is because JSON and JavaScript object notation, you can't query, the technical term is you can't query, like a key that has spaces basically, just because spaces aren't really represented. So, if we scroll down here to some of these variable names, first space name space suggestion, there's a bunch of spaces in there, right? So the way that you get around this in N8N's formatting is instead of calling, let me get that specific example, company legal name, or was it first name suggestion? So the way that you get around this is you can't just go first name suggestion, because that kind of breaks the formatting here, right? The way you can get around this is two things. One, you can make it so that the input data, aka the columns in your Google Sheet, are all just one word. So if instead it was first name suggestion, this would be fine. You could also do something like first name suggestion. Some people do that format. I don't really like that. I don't know why. What I do is called camel case. It's kind of like a programming convention. And here we can get into like a lifelong, mutually assured destructive battle where some people prefer camel case, other people prefer underlining. But I'm team camel case, so go team camel case. Instead, if we want to represent the spaces, what we have to do is you have to go brackets here, single colon, first name suggestion, another quote sign, and then another square bracket. So don't sweat the small little formatting stuff too much. I just wanted to give you guys, like, the best way that I found to learn this is literally just to like spam a bunch of examples. That's what I did when I was picking this stuff up. I didn't read a bunch of books on JavaScript object notation or expressions or whatever. I just spammed a bunch of examples, and the human brain is such that if you squint at it long enough, you'll sort of figure it out intuitively. Okay, great. So now that we've mapped all these, let's actually go and let's update this data, right? That's the whole point of this. So now that we've mapped all the data, if I click test step, and then I go over here to my Google Sheet, scroll all the way to the right, you see, and it just took us a second, but you see that we just, boom, we just updated all 4 of these simultaneously. We got the subject line for Amy, subject line for Joe, subject line for Mercedes, subject line for Susan. Same thing with all the elevator pitches, call to actions, postscripts. You'll see that the copy of the email is pretty similar, but it changes. So this one's, I know you're leading creative web solutions. I know you're into leveraging customer voices. I know you're focused on building relationships. I know you're advancing digital dentistry. These are all basically like reframing or paraphrasing the things that they said in their profile, which ultimately, is meant to make them go like, oh, okay, this person did their research. They read a little bit about me. So that's pretty cool. Why don't we take this one step further now? Why don't we pin this? And then I'm actually going to create a Gmail draft in my inbox just so we could see what's going on here. So I'm going to type draft, create a draft. I'll connect with my Gmail credential. And this is before I did the naming convention. So it was probably number 3. We're just going to create a draft. The subject line is going to be, let's just go to a fix now that we know how to do this. It's going to be JSON dot subject right here. And then the actual message is going to be pretty interesting, but I'll show you how we put it together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go JSON dot, and then what I want to do is I want an icebreaker. Sorry, I don't want an icebreaker. I want to go hi, and then I want to grab the person's name. So I'll go JSON dot first name right here. So hi, Amy, comma. Then we have the JSON icebreaker. Next up, I want to go JSON dot, $ JSON dot, and then what were you doing here? Was it the elevator pitch? Yeah, it was the elevator pitch. Paste that in there. Then we want to go $ JSON dot, what's the next one? Call to action. Beautiful. Then we also want to go $ JSON dot, and I'm sure you guys can guess what the last one is, but very quickly, make sure you do. Make sure you know, postscript. Now, if we open up this thing in the bigger example window, you'll see the email says, hi, Amy. I know you've been leading creative web solutions and net directives and following innovative marketing strategies for a while, so I figured it made sense to chat. The TLDR, I think you can add $5K a month to your client-focused internet marketing efforts with a few automated systems. I just did this for, and even if we just chat, I'd love to hear about what you're doing with video marketing. I guess I actually need to add a PS sign here, and it looks like none of these have periods. Actually, I think this last one has a period, but not all of these do. So just because I was a little bit fast and kind of designing this and I didn't put periods over, I'm actually just going to add the periods directly into the expression editor. I'm going to go PS here. Okay, and now if we open it up, this is what it looks like. We got periods everywhere. Cool. Wonderful. And then we have a little PS sign here. Even if we just chat, I'd love to hear about what you're doing with video marketing. Very, very cool. Awesome, awesome. So now that we have that pinned data, why don't we just draft these emails? So I'm going to create a draft. I'm not actually going to send this because I don't just want to spam a bunch of these people. I've also changed the email addresses and stuff, so I'd get a bunch of bounces. We're just going to test step. It's executing. We just executed 4 nodes. So now if I go over here, go to drafts, you'll see here that we have, hey, Susan, think I have something for you, read digital dentistry. Oh, geez, I'm realizing I didn't put the email address in actually. Yeah, I did not put the email address in. I just did the draft. In options, you have to go to email. And then what we want to do is we just want to drag that back here. JSON email to get that address. Let's create 4 more drafts just for shits and gigs. Then why don't I just delete the ones that I just generated right over here. I'm going to just discard these. And then you see that the 4 that I just did now have just popped up and they also have the email addresses there. So yeah, that's that with that example. I think at this point, you guys probably now have an intuitive understanding of how these fields work. And hopefully I've made a case for why you should just always use expression. Like there's no real need to do fixed, because if you think about it, like you could just write the same fixed thing. Like if I wanted to type, hey, Amy, think I have something for you regarding marketing strategies, and I just wanted to send the same thing every time, I could do so with the expression view of the field, right? Like same thing. It's just here I also have the ability to modify code a little bit and like do something if I wanted to. So I personally am always going to be using this moving forward. And the reason why, sorry, it can be kind of a lot to see if you muck around with. Just always put a $ first if you're referencing data from the previous node. And the reason why is it's just going to be the easiest for me. You get all the variables up here anyway. It's no big deal. So we're doing subject, stick that in there. We got the subject line. We are good to go. So I think we probably learned a fair amount about the fixed fields and expression fields at this point. The last thing I wanted to cover, I say mapping different field inputs here. The last thing I wanted to cover was, if we go back to Gmail here, and if we scroll down to, actually, this is a bad example. Why don't we go back to OpenAI? You see here how I selected the role field and it was fixed. And then I selected from a dropdown, user, assistant, system, whatever. Well, I can actually just go expression. And what you see here is this is just text that we are feeding this API, the node. We're actually just writing user. So instead of writing user, you could also write assistant. This fixed stuff, this is just made to make our life a little bit easier. But anytime you want to get the actual data representation, just move over to expression. So what are some examples of that? Well, like you see these simplify output and output content as JSON fields. We go to expression, you'll see that what we're actually passing is we're passing this true value. We're literally just writing true. Output content is JSON. If we move it to expression, you can see we're actually just passing true here for output content is JSON. The point that I'm making is all of this is basically just, if we just strip away all of the basic simple stuff, you can start getting into what's actually going on behind the scenes, how we're actually communicating with these nodes. The way that we're actually communicating with these nodes in practice is we're sending the term true. Now, the reason why this one has quotes around it, I believe, is because true is a special case. It's called a Boolean, which I'm about to cover right now. So I believe you need these quotes just for N8N to like not bug out at you. Just one of those unfortunate peculiarities of the platform. But that's that for fixed fields and expression fields. Okay, next up, let's talk more about JavaScript object notation. And if you guys already know JSON, if you've already experimented and understand the various formatting types available here, feel free to skip on until we move on to how data in N8N is represented. Should be about 15-ish minutes or so. But for everybody in the audience that doesn't understand JavaScript object notation, I just want to go real deep into it. And I want to make sure that you understand everything about JSON, because ultimately, as opposed to a lot of other no-code platforms, N8N, it doesn't ignore code or try and shove code away. It actually embraces code. So understanding a little bit of some of the code types, like JSON, for instance, makes you way more powerful. This is really what like everybody that makes money with this platform uses. We just use JSON to send data back and forth. And if you don't know JSON, everything's gonna be a little bit trickier for you. Okay, so what's the best way to intuitively understand JSON? Well, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to walk you through the various data types in JSON. I'm going to give you just like a brief little structure and format, and then we can actually just walk through JSON kind of step by step depending on different variables and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go and type in JSON formatter. This is just the simplest and freest JSON formatting platform I've found online. So you can see we got tons of ads in the middle here. You don't pay anything to use it, but basically what's happening behind the scenes is it's running with every time you press a keystroke, it's just double checking to see if it's a valid JSON. This is actually pretty useful for us because we can verify if something is indeed JSON or not just by looking at it. This isn't the only way to do it. Obviously, we could do a ton of different things. I could open up like a code platform like VS Code or something and do the same thing. But I just wanted to keep this thing accessible for all of us. All right, so zooming way in here, just so I don't get ads in my face 24/7. So what is JavaScript object notation? Basically, JSON is just a way to represent data in a structured and standardized format that minimizes the number of characters, and it also minimizes the ambiguity so that when we send data to and from some API or something, we could do so as efficiently as possible. So the way that JSON works, the way that you send and receive data, is based off of two concepts. The first concept is a key. So I'm going to write a key here. This key is going to involve my name. The first name is going to be, the key name is going to be called first name. So the key is just, you can think of it as like the name of a variable. So the variable is called first name, but what the variable equals is a whole different matter. And that's where the value comes in. So first name, I'm going to set to Nick. So this here is proper or well-formatted JSON. It's not yelling at us or anything like that. It's actually good, which is nice. So this is an example of one of the simplest JavaScript objects that you could build. It is a one key, one value object, the key being first name and the value being Nick. You've undoubtedly seen examples of this before if you tried working with any no-code or coding platform, N8N included. The thing is, in JSON, there are a few simple but consistent formatting quirks that you just have to pay attention to. So the first is there are a variety of different data types. Now, as you can see here, what I've done is I have this open curly bracket and then close curly bracket. I have the key name over here, a colon, that's just these two dots, and then I have the value. But what I've done is I've wrapped everything in these double quote signs here. So first name, double quote, Nick, double quote. And the reason why is because these the data type that I'm going with here is called a string. It's actually a particular data type. A string is just like written text, okay? So this is, if instead of first name, I say ID, this is a string data type. But it's not like you don't only have strings available to you, although a lot of platforms prefer strings. You also have a variety of other data types. Here's another data type we have access to. This is a number data type. It's numeric. So in order to send and receive numbers, you don't actually have to wrap them in quotes. This red here just corresponds to it being linted or formatted or whatever by this JSON formatter as a number data type. So this is still valid JSON, even though we don't have the quotes around this. Okay. This is not valid JSON, right? This does not mean anything because we're using string characters and we're inserting it in something that the software that we're going to be using N8N is going to be expecting to be a number. So basic rules of thumb are you can't just write a string without wrapping it in quotes. And the unfortunate reality is numbers can be both numbers and strings. So 3 ways to do X. Maybe we call this titles, right? The 3 here, this is a number, right? But we are still wrapping this within the quotes of a string. However, this is different from this. And so in practice, the reason I harp on this is because in practice, this usually doesn't matter that much. No-code platforms will take care of like the type conversion for you between number to string. If you're using a number, if you're sending it as like just the 3 without the quotes around it, for the most part, that's okay. You'll be able to use this as a string later on. But in like pure JavaScript and a couple of programming languages, you can't actually just, like if you wanted to, I don't know, run a function after this that added a number, maybe it was like, here, let me show you. Number of things, then title template. Let's say I had some function where I wanted to add the number of things to the beginning of the title template so that it said 3 ways to create N8N flows, 5 ways to create N8N flows, 15 ways to create N8N flows. Some programming languages wouldn't let you do that. In which case you'd have to convert this to, a string. And then you could just go number of things plus title template equals 15 ways to create N8N flows. Okay, great. So we've covered numbers. We've also covered, and numbers, I believe they have some fancy name, int, or technically they could be floats. They could be a number of things. But in our case, we're just going to go numbers. Next up, I want to cover a couple of additional data types. So one of the data types is called bool. So a bool stands for Boolean. Boolean just means 0 or 1, true or false. So true, see how this just turned into orange instead of gray? True is an accepted bool, and you don't actually need to wrap quotes around this true in order for it to technically be valid JSON. Now, for the most part, I will always just wrap quotes around all this stuff anyway, because as I mentioned, they do type conversions, and it doesn't really matter to me too much. But I just wanted you guys to sort of explain why sometimes you see stuff that is not wrapped in quotes, and that's one of them. You also have a few higher level data types. And one of the higher level data types that I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to show you 2. The first is I'm going to show you an array. An array looks like this. It's with square brackets. So you have a left square bracket and then a right square bracket. Then the other is another JavaScript object. And the really cool part about JSON is you can infinitely nest different data types within the values of a key. So I could theoretically wrap an array, which is just a number of things. And then inside of that array, I could wrap a number of other JavaScript objects that go infinitely deep. And I'll show you guys how to do this in practice, but maybe we'll just go items. Then here we'll go first name, Nick. Here we'll go first name, and then we'll go Sally. Then here, let's just do 2 so I don't run off the page. So now what we've done is we've created JSON where we have a key called items. Then inside of said key, we have an array, and inside of said array, we have 2 more objects. Both objects have the key called first name, and then they have different values. The first has a value of Nick, the second has a value of Sally. Now, to make people's lives easy, usually the way that this works is you will do some level of formatting like this, string formatting, just to make your life really, really easy. You'll be able to see like where the item starts, and then there's usually like a fair amount of indentation. And I don't know the exact amount of indentation, but usually it looks something like this. Now, at a glance, you can kind of see the structure of this. It's sort of nested. You have this top level array, and inside of the array, you have 2 objects, first name Nick, first name Sally. Okay, great. So let's create a hypothetical JSON object. And just because I know the most about myself, I'm going to be creating this for myself. But let's hypothetically just create a JSON object, and let's just do like a user object, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go user, That's going to be the key name. Then I'm going to go colon, and then I'm going to create another object. Inside of my user object, I'm going to have first name. First name is Nick. I'm going to have a last name. My last name is Saraf. I'll have city. My city, for the time being, is Calgary. I'll have foods he enjoys, or foods, let's just call it food preferences, right? Because if you say foods he enjoys, now you're insinuating that has to be a he. And then what if you add a user in the future that is a woman? Do you want to change the key name? No, obviously not. So food preferences, I'm just going to add an array, and inside of my array are going to be a bunch of strings. So one of my food preferences is, I don't know, Thai. I'm going to have another one that is, I don't know, like Japanese. Okay, so I like Thai food and I like Japanese food. Apparently I like absolutely nothing else. I have a very strict diet. Okay, cool. And then why don't we add, let's just add one more. And then I'm just going to add one called friends, hypothetically, but because as we all know, I have absolutely no friends. And then inside of friends, we're going to add another object. We're going to add an array. And inside of that, we're going to have first name. We're going to have Peter, my dearest and longest friend, of course. Thank you, Peter. Then underneath that, we're going to have last name Griffin, because I am now Love and Family guy. And that's one of my friends. And then I'm just going to copy this over. I'm going to add a comma, because you need a comma in between all items in an array and also all items in an object. So we have our object here. It's a pretty intense user object. We have a first name, last name, the city the person lives in, the food preferences. We have a list of friends, right? The reason why I go into this much detail here to create this object is just because I want to impress upon you that you can make an object arbitrarily detailed. You can make it as detailed as a human being could ever possibly want. And a lot of the time, you'll see that these APIs that you're accessing, these calls that you're making to these different nodes that return you data about a particular software platform, they will be really, really deep. And they will have nested data like 6 or 7 things, levels deep, essentially. So the easiest ones to use, in my experience, are just the ones that are all surface level. You just have like a user object and then a first name and then a last name, a city, and then maybe some food preferences. But in practice, we need to be a little bit more capable, and understanding how data is structured in JavaScript object notation is probably like half the battle, to be completely honest. So I believe I've covered everything I wanted to cover. The last thing I'll mention is you can't have a comma, I believe, be the last. Yeah, it doesn't allow you to have a comma for the last item in an object or an array. So notice here how we have a curly bracket, then we have the key name user, then we have another object sign, and then we have the key name and then the value, the key name and the value, the key name and then the value. Between each of these, we have a comma. But just know that at the last item in an array or the last item in an object, you can't have a comma. So you just need to remove that. If I press format or beautify, which is just my button that tells me everything's okay, then you see that it is indeed formatted and beautified. Everything's all right. Okay, cool. So that's the meandering, that's sort of how to understand this stuff from a bird's eye view. Moving forward, what I'm going to be doing is, just to make our lives a little bit easier, I'm going to be showing you guys in every module, or every node, I should say, what the JSON is of the input and the output. And the reason why is it's just going to make it a lot easier for us to ultimately, reference stuff and then do cool things with the data. So I go back to our Google Sheets example from earlier. I'm just going to move the input. I'm going to have the output be JSON. And you'll see that in this case, what we have is we have an open JSON curly bracket. Then we have a bunch of top level keys. So row number over here, well, that's a key. And you can see that it's represented as a 2. Very similar to what we talked about earlier, right? You'll notice that the formatting here is a little bit different. Notice how this one has an underscore, and then these other ones are all camel case. And some of these are capitalized. Because these are within quotes, none of this stuff really matters. But just showing you guys that there's a variety of like conventions that people do. Some people like capitalizing things, some people don't. So my recommendation to you, just to keep everything really clean and expected, is just to pick one format and stick with it. If you like the underscores, use the underscores for everything. If you like the camel case like me, use the camel case for everything. But anyway, civility is MRS. First name, Amy. First name, suggestion, it's empty. When something is empty in JSON, you just use these quotes. Notice that every item here has a comma in between it. Last name, comma, full name, comma, right? Just going all the way down. And then if I zoom out, I scroll, you'll see, now what do we have here? This was just one item. So if I just click on this little blue left curly bracket, it'll actually nest the item for me. And you'll see that inside of this item are 38 other items, but it'll just nest it for me. And then I can see the next one. Now I can see the next one. Now I can see the next one, right? And we only have 5, so that'll be it. But now I want to show you guys a little bit about how N8N formats stuff, because it's a little bit different than JSON I just showed you. But once you understand this, basically everything from here on out will be child's play. Notice how the very first character that you see on the output page on the JSON is a square bracket. Well, if you think back to the example that I gave you earlier, if we click out of this Pizza Hut ad, as much as I love Pizza Hut, this array here starts with these square brackets. And so we see over here, we have a square bracket as well. That means that this is an array, basically. So the way that data is represented in N8N is all data on the platform is represented as an array of objects, okay? So if I scroll down here to how data in N8N is represented, all of it is an array of objects. All of it will basically be those 2 square brackets on the outside of a number of items. And you could have as many items as you want. As we saw, we had 4 back over there. And inside of those 4 items, we had an additional 38 items nestled inside. But all data is an array of objects, meaning that that's how you send and receive multiple objects. Remember at the beginning here, we had 1 item? Well, that we just outputted a single variable there. Well, now after this Google Sheets call, we're doing 4 items. Those 4 items are represented in our JSON as an array inside of which is another object that has the key name, row underscore number, civility, first name suggestion, and so on and so on and so forth. So all data in N8N is an array of objects. The number one gotcha that I always see when beginners start out with this is they end up not fully understanding how many objects the previous node sent or is sending or the current node is receiving. And so then when they try and reference a particular item inside of the data structure, they find that it just doesn't exist, or that they need to like index it, they need to slice in to find a specific item inside of the array of items, or some other problem. But this is the number one problem that I see in practice, just running through reading like N8N help threads and stuff like that, that people struggle with on this platform. So if you understand this, the fact that all inputs and all outputs are an array of items represented as follows, and now if you understand how to format JSON, what JSON looks like, and now further, if you just make it so that you look at the JSON and not necessarily the table or the schema format every time you're sending or receiving data, you will solve the biggest gotcha that people have in N8N. It's just going to be a lot easier for you moving forward to create flows. You're basically going to take so much of the load off that most other people spend like hours and hours and hours trying to debugging right from the get-go, which is ultimately what I wanted to do here. Okay, great. So now we know that data in N8N is represented as an array of objects. So how do you actually reference that data? You guys remember earlier in that example here where we were using this Google Sheet module? Sorry, this Google Sheet node, I should say. And if we scroll down here, we were updating a field using data not from the previous node, but from a few nodes back. Well, basically, if I go back to JSON here, what you can see is we can go 1 node back to OpenAI, 2 nodes back to Google Sheets, 3 nodes back to when clicking test workflow. Okay, let's just go to this Google Sheet. In order to reference data, actually in this case, we will use the schema because you can actually see sort of them logically top to bottom. In order to reference data more than 1 node back, what we have to do, if we just want to redo this email one, we go we go curly bracket, dollar sign, okay? Then what we want to do is we go this left round bracket, then we have access to all of our earlier nodes. We can select the current node, OpenAI, but we can also select Google Sheets, and we can also select when clicking test workflow. What we want is the Google Sheets. And then if you just dot index, if you put a period, then you'll get an item. And the reason why I bring up this item is because basically all of this stuff is buried under this dot item syntax. And it's kind of annoying, but in order to reference, the row number, what we have to do is we have to reference the Google Sheet, then we have to reference the item, and then we have to reference the row number. Sorry, then we have to reference JSON, then we have to reference the row number. Why? Because N8N actually hides some of this information from us. We don't actually see the nested data structure. All we see is the nice representation of it. Okay, so this isn't actually represented this way, despite the fact that it looks kind of like it is. The way that this actually looks, kind of underneath the scenes behind what N8N is showing us, is it looks like this. And if you understand this, you'll understand how to reference basically any item in N8N. So this is equivalent to what we're seeing here. What we actually have is there's an additional 2 layers between us accessing the data through the dot thing. It's actually item.json. And then we have the row number, civility, first name, suggestion, stuff like that. Okay. So that means that when we want to access it, kind of just looking over here, the very first thing we have to do is we have to reference the Google Sheet. Then, if you think about it logically, then we have to reference the item. So go item. Then we have to reference the JSON.json. And then we have to reference the row underscore number if we want to, like that. And then we get that data, okay? So big issue, big misunderstanding, I would say, with N8N. Unfortunately, their documentation, in my experience, just is not clear enough to really elucidate what's going on here unless you have a programming background. But just want you guys to know that this is how it's done when you reference nodes that are more than one module back. If you wanted to just reference something in the previous node, it's a lot easier. If you go $, and then you go JSON, then you can just go immediately into the variables, message dot content or something like that, dot subject line, for instance. All right, so let's start looking at some of these foundational nodes over here, because I think at this point we've done, 4 different workflows. And I think you guys probably have a reasonable understanding of how to put a workflow together now, as well as some of the more nuanced portions of N8N, like the way that they do their JSON, some of the nuances behind burying names inside of various keys and how to do arrays of objects and backtracking and all that fun stuff. Let's actually cover like nodes, because nodes are ultimately what you guys are going to be using on a daily basis. After we're done that, then I'll rebuild this flow up here and I'll show you guys how all that stuff works under the hood. This will allow us to use some of the more, code-oriented features of N8N. And then I think after this point, like, you guys have a reasonable enough understanding to build most things. It's just a matter of like, what can you build and how exactly do you put the various Lego blocks I've shown you together. That's what the subsequent videos in this course are gonna ultimately just show you. It's gonna be nonstop building 24/7, baby. Anyway, so let's cover these foundational nodes. First thing is we're gonna cover nodes for doing things. So HTTP requests, webhooks, and OpenAI nodes. And we'll cover nodes that modify flows. So if, filter, merge, split into batches. There are a couple of other ones, but these are the ones that we're gonna be focusing on, at least for today. So, in terms of nodes that do things, if you guys aren't familiar with HTTP requests, this stands for hypertext, hypertext transfer protocol. And what we're doing when we do an HTTP request is we're doing the same thing that your browser does when it goes to a website. So just like when I go to google.com, I'm sending a request to Google, receiving a bunch of information what this web page looks like, and then I'm using my browser, Chrome, to render it into the beautiful, wonderful image you have in front of me. The HTTP request is the same thing. It just returns the thing to you in the code. You don't have that rendering portion. So I'm going to do a GET request here. And the GET request is just the simplest and most basic request. And this is ultimately what you're probably going to be using for most cases. And the URL I'm going to be doing is just my own, leftclick.ai. So leftclick.ai, just for the purposes of this discussion, looks like this. We build hands-off growth systems for B2B founders. There's a bunch of information about what our clients get, our leads. The lovely Joe Davies left me a testimonial. I should probably touch this website up at this point. It's been the same for a while. But anyway, I'm just doing an HTTP request using a method GET to leftclick.ai with no authentication, no nothing. We're just going to see what happens. So let me click that test step. And the response that we've received is, again, an array of objects. Our one item or our one object has a key name data. Then inside of that key name, you'll see that there is a ton of code, HTML it's called, okay? And just because this is not the easiest to see here, I'm just going to go schema view so you can see a little bit more of it. But basically, this here is the code of my website. This is what my website looks like to the browsers, and like what ultimately my browser uses to render it. You can see it says left click, space, vertical caret, space, AI, and ampersand. This is just a symbol that allows it not to break any characters. Process optimization. Left click is an AI-driven performance optimization agency. This is cutting edge tech to scale your company. This is all the code, right? It's pretty badass. And so if I were to go to left click, and then I were to go to inspect, if I were to open this up, this is like the Chrome dev tool, which allows you to see the code of the website. It's the exact same thing that's over here in the bottom left-hand corner, right? Literally no differences whatsoever. You built your agency, we'll scale it. The only difference is some symbols like the ampersand or maybe the @ sign, they just have like little replacements here or there so that they don't break any string formatting. So that's the HTTP request. Why does an HTTP request matter, and why would we want to do an HTTP request? Well, the reason why is because you can do pretty cool stuff with this. Like, If I go HTML, and then I say extract HTML content, what we can do is we could use the code of the page to pull out all of the text, okay? So why don't I just go text? I'll go P. Let's just do H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. Let's do P. I'm going to return this value as text, and then I'm going to return, let's just test this and see what happens. What we're doing is we're basically feeding in the HTML to this, like we're feeding in the HTML, and then we're using various CSS selectors, they're called, to extract a bunch of text for us. And it looks like I didn't do this right because we're not actually retrieving anything. Let's just try P for now. We'll do this. You're seeing already that we've extracted a bunch of P text. We've extracted basically like a specific type of tag inside this website that starts with a P, okay? Now we can do the same thing with a variety of other tags. Let's say I want to do H1. This is going to return all of the top level selectors basically. So let's do H1 test. We build hands-off growth systems for B2B founders. That's pretty cool. If I return an array, let's return all of them. We build hands-off growth systems for B2B founders, a better way to build ops. What our clients get if I do, I think if I want to select multiple, would I just do P like this? H1 and P? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now I'm getting all the text of the website. We build hands-off growth systems for B2B founders, find the perfect offer, automate your lead acquisition, solve your project management, a better way to build ops. This is all the text of the website. And all I needed to do in order to feed this in was I basically went through and then I fed in a bunch of elements, which I know just correspond to text, like this. And then I pressed test step. It went through and it extracted all of them into this big fat array, which is really cool. And now, like if you think about it, I can actually do some pretty cool stuff with this. I could have AI tell me something about the site very easily. You're a helpful, intelligent website scraping assistant. We'll go, I gotta add my credential first. We'll go down here and I'm just gonna have AI tell me a little bit about this website, return in JSON, just some data. I'll do that as my system prompt. And then here, your task is to take as input a bunch of scraped website text and return as output a JSON that follows this format. I'm going to say summary. I'm going to say three unique points. We'll do an array. We'll do probable customer demographic. Okay, I'm going to have it return an object. We'll see contact information, if any, and then we'll do, I don't know, some sort of like array of objects. Okay. And then that's what we're going to have it return. We're going to output the content as JSON, and then as input, you're going to add a message. What we want to do is we just want to join, this is being output as an array right now, right? Arrays, as we see, are many options or many different things on various lines. What we want to do is we want to take all of this, this output data, and we just want to turn it into one big long string. The way you do that here is I would use the expression tab, and then I'm just going to add some lines so the AI knows that this is my input. And then I'm just going to go JSON.text, and then dot, I'll just go join. Join is just a way to convert an array of items into just one big long string. And the thing you put inside of the join is you just put what you want to separate it by. So in my case, I'll just separate it all with a new line. If I enter the detailed editor here, you can see that now I've just turned all of this into one giant long string. I'm going to feed this into AI and I'm going to have it just tell me something about the website. So this took us just a few seconds and we already have a scraper that's basically capable of coming up with and then outputting a summary of what I do, 3 unique points that separate me from the competition, probable customer demographic information, maybe I can use to do something, then contact information, if any. And it looks like it separated that into a sub-object that says method, book a call, details, get started today, platform, website. As I'm sure you guys can imagine, I spent 15 seconds putting this puppy together. If you guys wanted to maybe scrape emails or do something like that, you could put something together that does this pretty easily. So that's the HTTP request module. Pretty node, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The next thing I want to show you is I want to show you basically the inverse of the HTTP request node. Instead of instead of us sending data, I want to show you a quick and easy way that we can receive a little bit of data if necessary. And it's nowhere near as hard as you think. There are a variety of different ways that you could do this, but I'm going to show you guys a really simple and easy one that I personally use all the time. It's called the webhook. So I'm going to go over here. Then I'm going to type in hook starts the workflow when a webhook is called. Basically what a webhook is it's just a server URL that you spin up, almost like my website, left click. And every time that server gets a request to it, it'll show up here with all of the data. Why is this so valuable? Well, it allows us to do a million things, connect workflow to workflow, add up and create our own API integrations, do a variety of things that otherwise we wouldn't really be able to do without them. This is basically the glue that holds the internet together, and this is a quick and easy way for you to make your own piece of that. So this is what the webhook fields look like. We have a test URL, production URL. Don't worry about the distinction there for now. We'll just use test URL. HTTP method we want to allow to access our service. We could do, I think we might actually allow multiple. I don't know. One of these, I think, allows us to do multiple, but we're just going to go with get for now. The path, we're going to leave the path as fixed. The path is just this URL string. Authentication, we're going to turn this off. We don't want any authentication. They recommend that you have authentication, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just not going to have any because otherwise it might be a little bit too much at once. Then we're going to do respond immediately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a test event for this URL, okay? I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to very quickly actually, I don't know if I can do this within the same workflow, actually. No, I can't because the workflow is already running. So I'm actually going to make another workflow really quickly. And I'm going to use that to call this webhook to get some cool data. So why don't I create a workflow? We'll just call this 3 N8N concepts, and then we'll go webhooks HTTP requests. I'm going to make a new HTTP request here. It's going to get this long thing that I've done over here, okay? I'm going to test it, and then over here, I'm going to grab that data. And as you could see, like what just happened, if you were paying close attention, is this just ran. The second I sent the data from this node, which is in another workflow, over to this node, which is on the current workflow, we received a ton of info. And the info that we received a big object, one item inside of our array of objects here. So a single object with a key name headers, which had a bunch of other data underneath, params, query, body, webhook URL, execution mode, test. So this might look a little bit dry and a little bit boring to us right now, but what's the value here? The value is you can run something from one workflow, send it to another workflow really easily. So in our first example, we sent no data, but what if I go back to my other workflow? Okay, that's number 3 here. And then I send some query parameters and I say first name and I say Nick. Then I go here, last name, Sarav. And then here, maybe I go UUID, that's just like user ID. And then I type something like this. Now, if I go back here, then I listen for a test event, and I go back here and then I send the test event. Now, when I receive it, not only do I get the headers over here, not only do I get the params, inside of our query are the variables that I just sent over inside of JSON. First name, last name, UUID. So man, I can do so many cool things with this. It's crazy. I could connect this to any web service out there, just give this URL as the URL where the events are sent, and then voila, I basically have like an infinite machine. I'll show you guys a quick example right now using ClickUp, but you guys can extend this example and do whatever the hell you want with it. So ClickUp is just this, project management platform that I have that allows you to send out webhooks. And most services that are good will allow you to do stuff like this. But you see there's a call webhook feature here. I'm going to go back to my webhook and I'm going to copy this URL. Now this is for get only. I don't actually remember if ClickUp sends a get or a post. So we're going to see what happens here. And then what I'm going to do is I'll just have status change. We're going to say from specifically hook to specifically outline. And we're going to create this. And basically what this means is when I change a field called status inside of my project manager, it sends a webhook over to this address. So hook to outline, I'm going to find something that's hook, maybe this one here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, listen for a test event. Then I'm going to change this to outline. And I don't remember if it's a get or a post request, so we might have to wait and try 2 or 3. This unfortunately does not respond to the methods that are not the same. Methods are, kind of a deeper story, but basically there are a variety of ways you can query a website or a web service. HTTP, most commonly you'll do either a get or a post. In the specific instance of ClickUp, it looks to me like they're probably using post. I'll go HTTP method, I'll go post. Now I'll listen for this test event. I'll change this back to hook. Then I'm going to change this back to outline. And now that it's outline, we're waiting for this post request. Let's see if we are receiving it from ClickUp. Okay, great. Looks like we received it. Now, what did we receive in reality? Well, excuse me, I'm like really close to sneezing, but I've decided not to, so I won't. Before we updated the query field, now we're updating the body field. We see it's built into ClickUp. And what we did, ClickUp has a number of default things that they send over when you do this webhook integration. One of them is the ID of the record. Now there's the trigger ID of the trigger, payload ID, the name of the thing, which was 3 ChatGPT prompt engineering hacks you need to start using. Next, some hooks, some order in text, some information about the person that created it. The point that I'm making is we just created our own integration with ClickUp, and it took me like 30 seconds realistically after I got off the HTTP method hump. So in practice, sometimes APIs like ClickUp, I'm sure they have API documentation somewhere, but sometimes they just don't tell you right at the point of creating the webhook whether it's going to be a GET or a POST request. So if your GET request doesn't come in, just change the HTTP method to POST and then rerun it with the POST example, and then one of those will work, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's how you do it as a test URL. Ultimately, though, we don't just care about having this workflow be like sort of a test. We want it to be live. And so when your workflow moves to production, aka you publish it and you make it live to actually interact with the internet, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go over to this production URL and then copy this URL and update all of your webhooks to send here. This will enable you to activate this. If it's in test mode, you actually won't be able to activate this, just I guess for safety or security purposes. It just makes the testing of webhooks unfortunately involve an additional step. The transition to publish it unfortunately involve an additional step, but it also makes your workflows a little bit more secure. So that's how you do webhooks. The last thing I'll mention are these OpenAI and AI nodes. Now, I'm going to have many videos after this one be all about AI agents, since that's obviously the big thing that's blowing up right now. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to cover them super briefly. I'm not even going to like run anything, but I just wanted to show you guys that N8N is very AI native. And so whereas I've been doing some very basic OpenAI calls with this OpenAI module, there's a variety of things you could do. You could create an AI agent, which generates an action plan and executes it, uses external tools. You can have OpenAI Message and Assistant or GPT. This is what we've been using, some basic LLM chains, and a bunch of like specific tools that are used to do things like categorize information, summarize information, and so on and so forth. So the AI agent, just to give you guys a very brief example, probably is one of the most intimidating looking modules or nodes, but it's actually one of the simplest in practice. When you create an AI agent, it'll automatically open up this when chat message receive node on the side. And then you'll see that down at the bottom of my screen, there's an additional button that allows me to chat with my model. But in order to make this work, what we need to do is we need to hook this up. Notice how there's this little warning here. What we need to do is we need to go down a chat model. We actually need to select the AI module or AI node that we want, the AI service, I should say, that we want to use. For most intents and purposes, I use OpenAI. This is just the best to me, but you could use Ollama, Mistral, Google Gemini, Anthropic. Feel free to play around with this for whatever your use case is or whatever your data privacy security requirements are. So I'm going to go down to my OpenAI chat model. The model I'm going to be using for this is going to be GPT-4o. I just find it has better answers. And then now you'll see that the warning sign is gone. Now we have an additional node I can drag and drop here. And now I can go to chat and I could say, hey, how are you doing? We've essentially opened up our own chat window. Hey, I'm just a computer program, but I don't have feelings, but I'm here and ready to assist you. Thanks, ChatGPT. And on the right-hand side, probably the most valuable part about this is you could see a log of what is happening and how many nodes were called in order to get you the result. This is important because the whole point of AI agents is their ability to call other tools to do things for you. So this says, system, you're a helpful assistant. Human, hey, how are you doing? This is just their prompt setup. So the input to OpenAI was this right here. And because we just asked how it's doing and so on and so forth, it didn't really do anything special. There were no additional tools. This is the same thing as you just sending a message to ChatGPT, essentially. Now, in order to make an AI agent like really work, you're going to want to add two things. The first thing you're going to want to add is you're going to want to add some sort of memory. If an AI agent doesn't have memory, then basically, if I go back here to chat and then say, what did I say in my last message? It will have no context or no idea. I don't have any access to past messages or personal data. Each session is independent. Basically, this is like it's like a send a question, receive an answer sort of window. But we don't want that. We want this to actually have access to our chat history. We want it to see what we've been talking about over the course of the last like 20 or 30 minutes and be able to reference those. So there are a variety of ways to do this. Basically, you need to implement some sort of database. And I'll show you guys how to implement some more complex databases in the future. But the simplest one, the one that N8N provides right out the gate, the one that most people on YouTube are going to be talking about, is this window buffer memory. Window buffer memory basically just allows you to store it here inside of the test window, which is the easiest to do. And the default is 5 messages. So basically every time you send it a message, it will send up to 5 past messages. But just for the purpose of the discussion, I'm going to go 10. So now what I'm going to do is I'll go to chat and then I'll say, hey, how are you doing? Then I'm going to say, what did I say in my, or what did I ask you in my previous message? And you'll see that it's asking how it's doing, right? So we're actually now accessing the previous message using this buffer memory. And on the right-hand side, you'll see here that the log has gotten a little bit more intense too. So basically we called the AI agent up at the top. The next thing that happened was we went through the buffer memory. We fed this in and basically added this to some big long stack of message history. Then we fed that in, plus the previous message. Then we said, hey, what did I ask you in my previous message? This is the input that is currently being fed into the model on that second call. And then we went down into buffer memory. We saved all of this again. And then we kind of came up and sent the answer. How about now? Cool. So now we're 3 levels deep. And as you can see, this is just a quick and easy way to load the memory, make sure that we're always having some sort of topical contextual conversation, which is pretty cool. Now, the real juice in AI agents, the reason why they've gained so much popularity, is just because of this tool section here, where you can essentially call a tool or call an action, just like we were doing before procedurally, but you can call it using AI and you can automatically format and get information from different tools. So there are a variety of tools that are just sort of set up for you: Airtable, Baserow, Calculator, Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Docs, Google Drive, all this stuff. What I'm going to do in this example, just because I don't want to spend all day on it before I do my more detailed AI agent tutorials, is I'm just going to select Google Calendar. I'm going to create a new credential, sign in with my Gmail account. And then I'll go over here. I'll close this window. Now that I've connected my Google Calendar agent, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my specific calendar, which is nick@leftclick.ai. And then now that it's connected to my AI agent, this is the create event. I don't want to create, I just want to get. So get all of my events basically from my calendar. Okay, and then in addition to that, what we have to do is we have to use this $ from AI feature here, and we just have to paste that into the expression field. What this does is this just tells AI, hey, I want you to provide your own details for the value of a field. In our case, I wanted to feed in some options that say, hey, I want you to grab data that is after this date, but before this date. So if I'm asking AI, like, hey, what's going on? Can you tell me what I'm doing tomorrow? And I'll just say Jan 28, 2025. The whole idea here is AI now has access to my calendar. It also has the ability to call that API, and then it can actually go and retrieve specific events from my calendar and then return them here. So as you can see, I have this call, me and my buddy Zach, and then it just has all of this information. Okay, great. How are you more generally? I can also just chat with it like I'm chatting to ChatGPT or something like that. So I don't always have to use like the tool that I'm calling. And the idea is you basically stack on 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 of these tools. Although I find in practice when you get past maybe 6 or 7, instead of calling a tool, what you want to do is you want to call another agent, which then decides to call a tool. It's basically like a big, almost like a search tree or something. But anyway, that's more or less the AI side of things. The last thing I'll mention here is this OpenAI model. This OpenAI node doesn't just have the message a model text action like we've been doing before. There's a variety of other things you could do. You can create an assistant, delete an assistant, list assistants, message assistants, update assistants, analyze images. You can generate images, generate audio. Like you have a ton that you could do here, which is pretty sweet. If I go down to generate audio and I'll say, I don't know, Nick is awesome and very pretty. And I generate it using the Nova voice. Click this test step. Not only can I generate text and stuff like that, but I can also have this generate me an audio output that I can then listen to. Variety of cool things you could do with this.
Nick is awesome and very pretty.
You're damn right I am. Variety of cool things you can do with this, but definitely don't sleep on the AI nodes. Don't just like stick to the one that I've shown you guys so far. Okay, great. So those are the foundational ones. In practice with N8N, you're probably going to be using these quite often. What I'll do next is talk about some nodes that modify flow. And here are a bunch more that like you're probably just you're going to want to read their docs and add them to your toolkit because this is like an everyday sort of thing. The first is an if, the second is filter, the third is merge, and the fourth is split into batches. So let me show you guys a very quick and simple example of the if. If I go here, and then I add my own trigger, and I just want to trigger manually. Oh, sorry, it looks like I already have one somewhere in here, right? So let's just repurpose this manual trigger for an example workflow, and then I'm going to build down below. This example trigger, I'm going to click it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use the edit fields. We're going to go down to JSON. This is just a handy dandy tool that allows you to set your own inputs and outputs. So I can now set my own output, and I could say first name, Nick. Last name, Saraif. And if I test this stuff, if I test my whole workflow, you'll see this broke because Saraif was not in quotes there. Got to make sure that all of your strings are in quotes. If I check out the JSON, you see the output of this module is now first name, Nick, last name, Saraif. Okay, I'm just going to pin this. Now, let's say I want to do something else. If the, if the input is Nick, I want to do something really cool. I want to provide prize. I don't know. $100. If the input is Nick, I want to go through my sequence, and then I want to generate another variable called prize, and I want to have it be $100, okay? But I only want to do that if the input is Nick. If the output is something else, then I want to have my prize be just $5. So Nick gets all the prizes here. He's very greedy. Okay, so how do you actually implement this sort of logic? Well, the simplest way is if I click this plus button and I just type if, you'll see I'll have this node pop up that says if route items to different branches, true or false. So I'm going to add that in there. And what I'm going to say is if first name, which by the way, we could still just drag if we wanted to. We could say if first name is equal to Nick, then proceed through the true node, which is up here. Then if not, we're going to want to proceed through this false node. Isn't that cool? So now we basically have two things that are occurring, okay? Prize up here was 100. Prize down here was 5. Now what I'm going to want to do is I'm just going to want to test this from end to end, show you guys what this looks like. So I just clicked this button. It's now going to execute my workflow. And sorry, just realizing that it's executing this workflow. Just going to delete this. So this is the only trigger here. I'm going to click test workflow. This is now going to run. And I just want you guys to see what's happening. I clicked test workflow. We then edited our fields. We added Nick as the first name. We then went to the if, and then as we saw here, first name was equal to Nick, meaning, oops, if I double click this again, the output is now only going down the true branch with one item. And then the upper branch was illuminated, it's green, and then that's how we get to edit fields with the prize equal to $100. Now, if I change this, instead of Nick, if it's like Sally or something, and if we run this again, what you'll see is the data is flowing through here because I didn't unpin it. So let's unpin it. If we test this now, what you'll see is the data didn't go through the top route anymore. It went through the bottom route. Okay, great. So now with this example here, why don't we just pretend like we're emailing somebody? So I'll go draft an email. I'm going to create my thing here and we'll say, congrats, you won. Go to expression. Then what I want is $JSON.prize right over here. So congrats, you won $5. How cool is that? See title, loser. Okay, great. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a draft. Voila, I have it now. If I go back here to my SOS Media Queries page, I see it says, congrats, you won $5. There's nobody to because we didn't set the email to, but pretty neat, huh? We do the same thing with this $100 field. Go over here, you'll see that I just copied like all of the same logic. It says, congrats, you won JSON.prize. It's grayed out right now because there's no data coming in, but you'll see that it'll work if I change the input back to Nick. Then if I test this, I'll see it'll follow the top route and then also send me an email. Okay, great. So now let's look to use the filter node. What I have here is I have my little first name, Nick, here. What I'd like to do instead is I'd like to just change this a little bit. So instead, why don't we say, instead we'll create an array of names. And inside of this, we'll have Sally, John, and then Nick, okay? And so now if we test this, we see 3 entries in an array called names. We have our top level array, which contains an array of objects, and we have our object. And then inside of that, we have a a key whose value equals a list of other objects, or an array of other objects. I know the terminology can be kind of a lot, and unfortunately, there are many ways to refer to the same thing. So if something doesn't make sense, just bear with me here and we'll in a moment. Okay, great. So let's say what we want to do is if any of these names correspond, if this names array includes Nick, then I want to continue with the flow. So I'll go array. Then what I want is I want to see if this array of names, feed that in here, contains, and I just want to say Nick. I'm going to test this out. What you'll see is that we've kept it because it does in fact contain Nick, which is pretty cool. If instead we wanted to see if it contains Peter, we test this, you'll notice that we are now following the discarded route. Okay, there's kept and then there's discarded. The thing is, it just goes down the same flow. Whereas if sort of split into 2, there's a true and a false route. This one actually just like continues and proceeds down the same flow. If something matches the filter, it will continue. If something doesn't match the filter, then it won't. So what we could do, if I just paste in this Gmail node, so we could basically build a very similar flow. But what we could do is if it is kept, then we could send we could send a prize of $100 instead, and we could hard code that $100 in. So I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if it's kept. Okay, so right now name contains Peter. It's probably not going to be kept, right? So test workflow, it's going to stop right here. It does not proceed any further. If instead I change the filter so that it contains Nick, then we test it. What we see is we're going to move on, and we're actually going to like proceed with the rest of our flow. So this filter here just allows us to kind of stop if it doesn't match our condition or continue. And you can add as many conditions as you want. You can go and or. You can add whatever sort of logic you'd like. I used array logic here too, but there's also a lot. There's like string. You could check to see if something exists or matches arrayx. Number, date and time, Boolean, array. And then there's also a bunch of object ones as well. So that's filter, pretty straightforward, I would say. The last thing is, there's 2 more. There's one called merge, and then there's split into batches. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to have 2 routes or 2 outputs of a module, and then I'm going to combine them back into one, and I'll show you guys what I mean with this. Remember earlier how we had some HTTP requests? What I'm going to do is I'll go first name, Sally. Then I'm going to have, let's just say second name. Actually, let's go person 1, go person 2. Just for the purpose of this example, we're going to have 2 people. Person 1, Sally, person 2 is Nick, okay? Next, what we're going to do is we're going to add an AI node. Down to OpenAI, and then I'm just going to message a model. Then here, I'm going to say, write a detailed, fun story about, and what I'm going to do is I'll go, I don't know, person 1. So JSON.person1. This example is sort of silly, if I'm honest, because we could just hard code the names in there, but I just wanted to do this to show you guys how this logic of the merge node would work. I'm going to select GPT-4o. And then because it's just a very quick and easy example, I'm not actually going to add a user prompt. Okay, it's now going to go and it's going to write me a fun story about JSON.person1. Person 1 was Sally, so we're going to see it in a second. Very fun. Thank you very much for the detailed story. Cue Jeopardy music. Cue other elevator music. All right, it's taking its sweet ass time. Could be for a variety of reasons. I might have like a little bit of rate limit action going on my end just because of all the examples that I provided, but it could also be something else. I don't know. Let's see here. Okay, cool. Looks like it did once upon a time in the vibrant city of Elmsworth, where the streets hummed with the rhythm of hopeful dreams and endless possibilities. Okay. So we just wrote a cool story about Sally. What you can do in N8N is you can actually connect the same output to multiple future nodes. So what I've done is I have one over here, which I'm going to rename, right? Story about Sally. Then I have another one over here, which I'm going to say write story about Nick. Then down over here, I'm going to say write a story about person 2 instead of person 1, which is, now going to equate to Nick, right? If I test the step, same thing is going to happen. It's going to call GPT-4o. It's going to write me a cool story. The issue is, if you think about it logically, we now have 2 routes. We have one top route that writes a story about Sally, another bottom route that writes a story about Nick. So if we wanted to do something with these stories, like I'd kind of have to repeat the same logic up here. Let's say I wanted to email this to somebody. Well, I'd have to Gmail up here. I'd also have to Gmail down here, right? I'd have to duplicate it. N8N provides a pretty simple and easy built-in way to avoid that. It's called the merge node. So you can merge data of multiple streams once data from both is available. So if you just click on it, you'll see that there's a mode append or combine, or SQL query. I'm just going to stick with append for now. I'm just going to feed in these inputs. And in this way, what I can do is I could actually just write, one Gmail node here instead of 2. And maybe I could like append both of these stories or something. But let me actually show you what this looks like now. I'm actually going to test this workflow from end to end. As you see, it first does the top route. And you can see this is orange because it's like filling out the story about Sally right now. This is currently active. It's waiting to fill in the merge the second this is finished. And I think I probably should have set some character limit to the story, because now I'm thinking about it, it's probably writing a lot. Rip my tokens. And then after it's done with the story about Sally, it's going to go and it's just going to do the same thing, write a story about Nick. Hopefully this finishes before the next ice age. Okay, that took way too long, but just make sure you put in some sort of limits next time you do one of these calls. Otherwise, you'll be waiting here until the end of time. However, what we see as our final product is the top route completed and then populated the merge, and the bottom route also completed and populated the merge. Now, we had one item from a top route, one item from the bottom route. Then we also carried forward one item from the top route, one item from the bottom route. But what you'll see is the output of this merge is now 2 items instead of 1. The reason why it's 2 items is because we use the append. So now we have, the story number 1, then we have the story number 2, basically. We don't actually have to just output 2 things. We could actually just output like 1 item instead. But because in N8N, outputs are arrays of items, you kind of have a choice there. Now, since we output 2 items, what we could do is we could add our little Gmail node, stick that down here, connect it. Then I'm just going to pin this. And what I could do is I could email myself this story. I could say story about, just because I backed myself into a corner here, I need to write kind of like a little bit more difficult of a line of code. But I don't have access to Nick here, right? Like I don't have access to a single variable that contains the value that I'm looking for. So this is person 1, Sally, person 2, Nick. So I mean, I could select person 1, but then my second run would also say Nick, right? So both of these would say story about Sally, even though they have different stories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'll look at the actual story. So I'll go, I'm going to go to the merge. I'll look at the actual story here, which now that I think about it is actually just JSON. Then I'll go message, I'll go content. Then if it includes the term Nick, then I'm just going to return Nick. Otherwise, I'm going to return Sally. That's how that works. So if this contains Nick, I'll return Nick. If not, I'll return the term Sally. This is just a kind of a shorthand way to use the if else logic, same as what we had before. So I'm just going to pop this puppy open. And let me take a look at the data. Story about Nick. Nick was an ordinary guy with an extraordinary dream. I wanted to become the first person to ride a unicycle all the way across the United States. Then Sally, once upon a time, in the quaint town of Lavender Hill. I think this was the one where I timed out or something because of the rate limit, unfortunately. So it doesn't look like it generated me anything more than once upon a time in the quaint town of Lavender Hill. But I'm sure we could, I could rerun this. Let me just make sure that the prompt is a little bit shorter. Less than 100 words. Let's just do that. And then good. Awesome. We should be good now to actually produce this puppy. Let me just go over here and delete these examples that I don't need in preparation for the next run. And cool, we warmed up 2 Gmails. Now we have a story about Sally, who's a curious hamster, and then I am a curious inventor. Lovely. Wonder why they use the term curious both times. But anyway, I hope you guys see now that like basically the merge connects two things together. The if statement sort of does the opposite, kind of creates two routes, right? Yeah, this is kind of neat when you contrast and compare them like that. So I believe now we have everything we need except for the split into batches run. Split into batches is kind of a little trickier of a thing to conceptualize. So I'm going to show you a real example from a source that I use to extract a bunch of data. So let me take a quick peek here at, I think I was doing deep personalization system. Yeah, so I created a video on a deep personalization system a while ago. And as part of it, what I'm doing is I'm waiting over here for data to come in through a webhook. I send in data to this webhook, and then I use it to call an API that gets a bunch of data set items. The data set items are pretty big, right? As you can see over here, it's a bunch of data about specific leads. But notice how it says 128 items above, right? Anytime you output more than one item in N8N, what you can do is you could loop over every item. Then you could perform something individually on just that item. And then once you're done with that, you could go back to the loop over and over and over and over again until you're completed. So in my case, I had a lot of items in this. I had 128 for Christ's sake, right? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to run my 5-column personalization flow, similar to what we saw earlier. And then I also wanted to add a row to my spreadsheet. Now, unfortunately, every time I did that, I consumed one API call. And a lot of these platforms have pretty intense rate limits. So instead of me, one issue I found very frequently was I just kept on getting timed out. It would say 400 error or 403 error or whatever. Basically, the gist of that is that, I'm over the rate limit and they're not going to allow me to make any more requests for a certain amount of time. So what I did instead of me just submitting all of those requests simultaneously, I added this to a loop over items, and then I added a designated wait node. The wait node is a simple node in N8N that allows you to wait for a certain number of seconds, in my case, 5. And in this way, I was able to basically take one item, go from start to finish, wait 5 seconds, and then loop back and then proceed with my next item. And I basically just went, one after the other, after the other, after the other, over and over and over and over again. So that's just to give you guys some context on what that actually might look like. If I go down here and I set my items here, I'm just going to use a feature in N8N that allows you to automatically set like your own test data. So I'm going to say, there's first item and then there's second item. And my data for that, where's the edit fields? Right over here. If I zoom way in, you'll see that I'm not outputting 2 items, right? So what I can do is I can go loop over items, split in batches. You set the batch size to 1. What it'll do now is it will go first item and then second item. What I'll do is when you add a loop over items, it immediately adds a replace me node. And this is what you're supposed to basically replace with the thing you want to do. So in my case, I just want to wait 5 seconds. So I'm just going to go over here and go wait exactly 5 seconds. What I want to do is for the loop route, for the route that is going to be looping over my items. So basically for every item, you can think of this as, I want to wait, and I want to wait 5 seconds. Very cool. And then the output of this needs to feed back into the input. This is kind of like the tricky part. So when you go through a loop, I'm going to click a test workflow. I'm going to generate 2 items, and then I'm just going to pull 1 item out of that, and I'm going to wait 5 seconds. I'm going to go to the second item, and then I'm going to wait 5 seconds. Is this going to do anything? No. But notice that there is both a loop route and then there's a done route. And basically in N8N, once you're done with the loop route, it just automatically goes to the done route. So I could do something like this, and maybe I send myself an email. Let's just draft. And then let's say, done looping. You successfully waited 10 seconds. Awesome. So we're going to wait 5 seconds and then 5 seconds, and then we're going to Gmail, okay? So that's it. I'm going to test this workflow. That's the first 5 seconds here. And that's the second 5 seconds here. And once this is done, we can now send over an email draft, or queue up an email draft, I should say, which is right over here. I should note that I may have ran this twice. I feel like I just ran this twice. Looks like it's carrying all of these here. Oh yeah, sorry. It'll output all of the records that you feed it in, basically. So I fed it in 2 records, and then the third run it went and then fed both of those records in as input to my Gmail branch. What I could do is I could just feed in, I could take these 2 items and I could convert into just 1 item by combining them. And then I wouldn't have to deal with this, which is kind of neat. So that's probably what I would do in practice. I wouldn't actually proceed here with 2 items. I would just do 1. There's a really cool built-in way to do this in N8N, just called execute once. So if you just go to the settings page of any node and then just click execute once, you basically stop the multiple executions regardless of the number of elements that precede it. So I just clicked execute once. Instead of me sending 2 emails now, it's only going to send 1. That's run number 1. That's run number 2. Then it'll go and it'll feed 1 item as an output. So if I refresh this now, instead of 2, I'm only going to have 1. Quick and easy hack. And yeah, because we're building stuff live, hopefully you guys get to see the applications of this in real time as we put something together. All right, so now I think we are at the point where we can realistically build out substantially more complicated flows. What I'm going to do now is basically run almost like a test of sorts, where we're going to take all the information that I just tried to shove into your brain, and we're going to use it to build out a flow that actually does something business worthwhile, a flow that I've sold many times before, and a flow that's made people a fair amount of money. So this is what the flow looks like right now. I'm actually going to simplify it. I've decided to do it a little bit simpler just over the course of the last 20 minutes thinking about it. But basically, just to keep things, make a long story short, there's this service out there called SOS. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. They send out a query every day from journalists where the journalists are looking for people that match their criteria to answer questions. So for instance, this one up here is from Jordan Rosenfeld, who's saying, seeking healthcare and Medicare specialists to weigh in on how RFK Jr. and Dr. Mehmet Oz might affect benefits or healthcare if appointed. Know that this is usually US specific. I think they have kind of like a global arm sometimes too, but most of this is going to be US specific. And then it says, hey, I'm looking to speak to people in a nonpartisan way about the possible changes to things like Medicare, healthcare, insurance. These are 2 stories. Specify what you're commenting on, can be both. Robust and longer answers are prioritized. You must have the relevant experience. We'll link back to your site. Please include pronouns. There's a lot going on here, right? Basically, what we want to do is we just want to take this whole long email, and we just want to extract all of these. So this would be 1. This would be 1. This would be 2. This would be 3, and so on and so forth. And we want to feed this into AI, and we just want AI to give us a very simple answer. Hey, is this relevant to me based off of some characteristics I'm going to give you? And 2, if it is, can you pre-draft an email for me? So pretty simple, pretty straightforward stuff, right? Let me show you how straightforward this flow can be given what you now know. And I want you to treat this as like a test, basically. You've made it this far. Let's actually see if you could build something out that's business worthwhile. If something that I'm saying doesn't make sense, pause the video and look for the specific part that I've covered the concept in. Because that's basically the purpose here. I just want you guys to be able to reaffirm your knowledge and show you how now you can do something pretty cool. Because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just looking for a Gmail trigger there. I'm going to select my credential. Sorry, not create a new credential. I'm going to select my credential, Gmail account 3. And the way that this module or node works is it extracts emails from my inbox that match my specified filters, and it does so in the timing that I give it. So every minute, hour, day, week, month, X, custom, whatever. I'm just going to say once a day for now. It's going to be 0th hour, 0th minute, simple stuff. The event I'm looking for is message received. Then what I need to do is I need to add a filter down here. And there's one called search, where I basically just look for emails from SOS. Luckily for me, they're all formatted in very similar ways. SOS media queries. So if I want to get all the emails from SOS, this is just what I do. Now, I don't just want to get any email. I just want to get the specific email just to show you guys what I'm working with. Later on, we'll then we'll separate it. So it's just SOS media queries. It'll work with any of them. But for now, I just want to grab this one. Here's what you do. You just go subject, and then you'd feed this in. This is a Gmail operator. So just use whatever same filtering mechanism you do for your own emails in Gmail and just feed it in over here and it'll work fine. Okay, now let's test this out. Let's grab the data. We've received a ton of data. This is an object with 11 items inside, but this simplify is sort of working against us here. The Gmail trigger just natively always has simplify on. We actually want to get rid of this. I'm going to go to expression, just like we know how, and press and type in false. This is the same, by the way, as just turning this off. I just wanted to be clear that I always use the expression field. And now I'm going to get the actual data of the email, which is way more, as you can see here. Instead of whatever it was, 12 or something, now it's, or 6, now it's 13. And the headers object has 27 items buried in it, just in and of itself. The thing we're looking for is this text variable, which is the same as what we had before. Tell friends to join source of sources. It's always free. Want to know how to strengthen your relationship with journalists, blah, blah, blah. We're then going to pin this. So now we have access to all of this JSON in future nodes. And I think I got lost here with my Gmail trigger. And now let's actually go ahead and let's split this data. Let's basically get our data so that it's just a bunch of these. How are we going to do this? Just think about this. We got a bunch of text processing features available to us. We know a little bit about the JSON, JavaScript and stuff like that. But what are some ways we might actually realistically be able to do this? Well, the way that I see it is the great news about source of sources and the previous service called Haro is that they just have the same like characters everywhere. So they have a bunch of stars here. And then between every story is basically just like these underscores. So underscores there, underscores there, underscores there. So when you see a similar pattern like this, it becomes very easy for you to like process this in a no-code tool using a term or a function called split, where you basically just feed in a whole big string and then you just split it based off something that you want. So I'm going to probably need to split this twice. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to split based off this up here. And then, there's like this top section, and then there's going to be this whole bottom section. Then after that, I'll grab the bottom section. I'll split it based off of this probably. Then I'll just be able to get like the individual sections. If that sounds like rocket science to you right now, don't worry. We're going to go over here, press edit fields. And what I'm going to want to do is for now, I'm just going to go manual mapping, click add field. This allows me to create my own variable basically based off of, the previous module. So I'm going to type above, actually, yeah, let's just call this below. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed in, where is this text? It's right over here. I'll go to the expression field. Then I'm just going to type $JSON dot. And what I want is I want text. Okay. So now if we open up this big fat editor here, we got all the text right here. Pretty sweet, right? We don't want all the text. We only want the stuff that is below this line. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm just going to go over here and press dot. Now we have a bunch of functions, and I haven't covered all these functions yet. I will in the future videos. But one of the functions that I use all the time is called split. Just press split. And all we need to do now is we just need to feed in the thing that we want to split it by. So I'm going to feed in what I just copied a moment ago. Okay. And now, instead of just seeing the string, we actually see an array. And this is what arrays look like when they're output in N8N. It says bracket array and then colon space. And then we actually have the whole array here. And this array is split based off of wherever this was. So I think it's going to be split right over here. The last character before it will say information week. Okay. So we go information week. I'm going to zoom way in. And yeah, that's what the array looks like, right? We have a comma. So this whole thing was a string. Then we have quotes and then a comma, a space, and then we have another quote. And this is the beginning of everything underneath it, which is awesome for us. Okay, so this is basically what we get. And now the really cool thing that N8N allows us to do is it allows you to pull objects out of an array. So this is an array with two items inside of it. The one string that's everything above those lines, this little star line, then another string that's everything below the star line. We can just go dot last. And now we'll just pull out the actual string itself, which is this, all of this. How cool. Now, what else we could do is theoretically, we could just split this again. We could split this again and then extract everything split based off of these characters. So I go dot split, feed this in. Now we have another array, right? How many items are in here? I don't know. Let's find out. So I'm going to test the step. You click on test step and now we have a bunch of different items. So yeah, just make sure you set the array here anytime you're screwing around with data. Otherwise, I believe they have a field like auto type convert or something. I haven't used that one before. Type conversion errors or something. I actually just set the specific data type that I want. In this case, I'm creating an array. I'm splitting stuff to turn it into array. So I'm going to be doing so with this array dropdown. Okay, but anyway, now we have a big array. Pretty cool, right? And it looks like we have 19 items in total. What I want to do with this is, first of all, I'm going to pin this. Second of all, I'm going to go over here to extract titles, and I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to have to rewrite the whole prompt. I think that would probably take like 15-ish minutes or so when all is said and done. What I want to do is I want to grab this data, which looks just like this, and all I want to do is I just want to feed this into AI now. And I just want to have AI tell me, hey, am I good? If I'm good, then go ahead and draft an email. If I'm not good, then don't. And I know just from experience that this is sort of split into two parts here. So I'm just going to copy this over. I'm going to use it to create my prompt. Okay, what does this prompt look like? You're a helpful, intelligent administrative assistant, very on brand for me. That's a system prompt. Then, hey, I'm a business owner specializing in AI, automation, marketing, and software. Then what I'm going to say is below is an email requesting let's do an email request from a journalist looking for a story about, information about their story. And then just going to paste a bunch of data in. Your task is to determine whether it is relevant to me, and if so, pre-draft an email. That answers their questions using my tone of voice, and I'll say casual Spartan. Some information about me. I own 1 second copy. Here are my links. Then I will say, sorry, I just got a lot going on here because I'm piecing this together between two different prompts. But anyway, some information about me. I own 1 second copy, a successful AI marketing company that was overnight came up. My name is Nick Saraf. Here are my links. Don't use it unless asked. Links. And then below is a request by a journalist for outreach. Write a succinct Spartan email responding to each query. Say a succinct Spartan email. Be concise. Use the following format. Okay. Then I will say, if it is relevant, return a JSON object as follows. True. Email body goes here. If it is not relevant, return false for relevance and leave email body blank. Some information about me, good. Use the following email format, email template when responding to relevant inquiries. Cool. Make sure to respond in JSON. Very sweet. Okay, great. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to provide as input the specific item that I am referencing. So what you'll find is when you're referencing an array like this, what it'll do is it'll grab the specific item of the array. So JSON.below 0. I don't actually want that. What I want to do is I basically want to loop through this array. And then for every item, I want to feed this in as input. This is selecting the first item here with the 0. Everything is 0 indexed. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So in order to do that, we're going to have to take our data and do just a little bit of pre-processing first. We're going to want to combine a field from many items. Turn a list inside items. Here using the split out node. I don't believe I talked about split out, but rest assured, all this does is it turns an array into a bunch of items so you can run them one by one. Okay, great. So below, no other fields. And now we have 20 items on the right-hand side. And now basically we can feed in every one of those 20 items to AI. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to feed in this below field. And now instead of me having to go JSON.items.below 0, below 1, below 2, because we are now splitting this into a top level array instead of before how it was an array and then the curly bracket below and then another array with like 20 records. Now it's just below, 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 below. It's going to run basically once for every item that we've received. So yeah, that's that. We should be able to get some JSON here. I don't want to run it on all 20 as a test though, because all we're doing is testing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go in between these and type in limit. Limit allows us to restrict the number of items. So I actually only want to run this twice to start. And I want to see what happens. So I'm actually going to do this on 2 items. Then we're going to see what those 2 item outputs are. And if they're good, then we'll continue. We'll pin them and then move on. And if not, then we won't. We'll be able to modify them before we actually waste 20 tokens worth of data. And I'm just going to pin all the data moving forward. And then I'm going to go over here to limit. And then I'm just going to press this test step. Okay, I'm going to pin this now. So now we have the 2 items. So I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to test this step. Looks like we are now producing, and it looks like both of these were false. So I'm going to want to up this limit just a little bit. Maybe we'll try 3 last items instead. We'll overwrite the data that's pinned. We'll pin it again. I'll go back to extract titles. And now we're feeding in the last 3 enterprise Gen AI users. Yeah, this is probably me. Edge AI and stuff. Looks like they kept their AI entries at the end, so that makes sense. And we're now doing 3 API calls. It looks like there were 2 trues. So true up here, true up here. This looks like it was just junk data. So we could actually cut that out, show you how to do that later. But now we actually have like emails drafted. Hey, Pam, I own 1 second copy, accessible, blah, blah, blah. Here's a big answer to all of these questions. That's pretty cool. All we need to do now is we just go Gmail, we draft. Oh, you know what? We need to grab the email, don't we? Yeah, I don't think I actually grabbed the email address of the person. Yes, I did not. So let's actually change our prompt a little bit and let's edit it so that we actually output the email too. So I'm going to go back here. I'm actually going to go email address. Discovered, or let's just go their email. Okay, there you go. That should probably be sufficient. Let's actually test this one more time. So now we should actually extract their email address as well, assuming the AI does what its silly human overlord tells it to do. And now that we have the email address, we'll actually be able to like use that to feed into a draft. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. So we'll go back to Gmail. I'm going to go draft, create a draft. Credential, Gmail account 3, resource draft, operation create. Then I'll say and then I'll say SOS inquiry. I'm going to go message, and then all I'm going to do is I'll go back to my schema. I'm just going to drag my email body in here. And then I'm going to add an option called, we'll go to email, and then we're actually just going to feed that puppy in there. And now we can actually test this out on 3. So let's go 1, 2, 3. So you have 3 items, all of them just wrapped up. We go back to my email inbox, go down to drafts. We'll see that I created 1 for each. It looks like I created an additional one, but anyway, I'll cover that in a second. The first was this one to this lovely Pam lady. Very nice. Second was this other one to this lovely John fella. Very cool. Everybody followed my email template, no issues. And then, yeah, it looks like we just used 1 additional email. I think the reason why we sent that additional email is because we technically outputted an item. So I wonder if we could just not output an item. That'd be one way to do it. Yeah, we could just not output the item. Or, we could just add a filter, like I was showing us how to do so before. So if, let's just go down here. Let's go JSON dot. Let's go item 3. We'll go down to JSON.relevance, message.content.relevance. So basically, if this is equal to false, this is equal to true, then we'll continue, and then if not, we won't. So we should get 2, right? Yeah, there you go. We kept 2 items, and now we're only going to be sending emails on the 2 items that passed our filter. So just because I always like to do an end-to-end flow, I'm just going to discard some old drafts here, delete everything, and then run this one final time. Just to show you guys what all this looks like, we will use the Gmail trigger, edit the fields, split them out. I'm going to have the limit be 3 items just for now because I don't want to like draft a bunch of emails. Extract the titles, add a filter, and then create 3 drafts. Just run this from start to finish. We're now extracting the titles. And by, extracting the titles, I mean we are filtering and creating an email. And then the end result is we have 2 drafts in our inbox, which is kind of neat. And if we wanted to take this even further, what we could do is we go down to Gmail, and then we could add a label to this message. Just to make it abundantly clear, if I select the message ID that we just created, it's going to be right over here. I could just call this public relations or something. And now basically it'll just automatically apply a label to these drafts inside of my inbox that I just know that these are public relations inquiries, basically. These are not, other email drafts for some purpose. And that's kind of cool of a flow, but I'm actually just going to stick that right over there. And then because I'm already getting mixed up with the extract titles, I'm just going to say filter and respond to email, or maybe create email body. There you go. A little bit simpler. So yeah, we used a ton of new functions here. We used the split. I then used the split out. I don't actually use all of these super often. We did use the filter, which I talked about and covered. And then the limit is just basically like an internal tool that I like to use to make sure that I'm not screwing around with token usage or spending a ton of like executions or anything like that. I think this system's a lot cleaner than that other system that I was going to build with you guys before. It's also a little bit more simple. Here I have just a ton of code, unfortunately, but we'll get rid of that. We'll use this as the 2 templates for us. Then I'll also just make this nice and easy to see. And yeah, I hope you guys appreciated this, just so that we could do a quick recap. And because in my experience, doing a recap of the stuff is sort of how you remember it. We started off by talking a little bit about fields, specifically 2 types of fields. There were fixed fields, and then there were expression-based fields. I sort of made a case for you as to why you should probably favor expression-based fields over fixed fields wherever possible, because you could do the exact same thing anyway, and you also just get like a ton of code options. So I always just toggle a little expression. I then showed you how all of these different field inputs, even like the little toggle buttons, these really are just expressions at the end of the day. If it's a toggle button, it's true or false. If you're selecting a Google Sheet or something, there's actually an ID behind it. And so now you know a lot more about sort of the underlying data and the way that N8N structures stuff. I then covered JSON, JavaScript object notation, in probably pretty excruciating detail. Hopefully that wasn't too boring. But we covered a bunch of different variable types. Just to recap them, there was a string, there was a number, there was a bool or boolean, true or false. There was an array, and then there was also another object. So you could bury JavaScript objects inside of JavaScript objects. There were key names, values. We learned a little bit about the formatting with quotes, as well as commas and brackets and that sort of stuff. But the reality is if you just like stare at JSON long enough, kind of give it a good squint or two, eventually it'll start making sense. And that's why I've now changed all of the input and outputs inside of our N8N course tutorial to favor a JSON, JavaScript object notation, just so you guys could see it and kind of get used to it. From there, we covered a little bit about how data is represented in N8N. So specifically, all data, all inputs and outputs in N8N are structured as an array of objects. So there's some top level, curly or square bracket, and inside there's just a bunch of those JavaScript objects nestled in it. And if you want to reference the most previous node, then all you need to do is just use this little $JSON syntax. If you want to reference nodes from 2, 3, 4, or n nodes back, n standing for whatever number, then you would do the $, but then you'd have to like specifically reference the name of the node. No big deal. N8N actually does a lot of that selection for you, and there's usually a little drop down or toggle button that you can just click to get there. We talked about how to reference earlier fields, how to do some backtracking with like dot notation and square bracket notation. And then I also covered some common gotchas. The most common gotcha in N8N, just to be clear, is people don't understand that it is an array of objects that you're referring to. And so N8N will run once per item in the array. And so if you think that, if you're trying to reference one item, but you're really referencing all of them, obviously you're going to get an error message. It's not going to work. Likewise, if you're trying to reference a number of items, but you only reference some subset of them, you're going to have some error message, and you're going to get that dreadful red text that I think we all hate so much. So understanding that everything is just an array of items, an array of objects, this goes a long way towards insulating you against that. Finally, we covered some foundational nodes. We started off with the HTTP request node, which allows us to basically request or do the same thing that your browser is doing when you access a website, pull all of the code. And then I also showed you guys how to do cool stuff with AI, where you take the extracted or parsed components of that node, like, maybe like my left-click website, and then turn that into some sort of AI structured data, like a summary, like some interesting tidbits about that website, maybe the contact details if you could find it. I then covered a little bit about webhooks. If you guys are familiar, if you guys remember, webhooks are just like the glue that holds so much of the internet together. I showed you guys how to send a request from one workflow and receive it in another workflow. Then I also showed you guys how to use a third-party platform, in this case ClickUp, but you can really use whatever the hell you want, to send a request upon some triggers that now I'm like connecting N8N and ClickUp with my own native integration without even necessarily having to know too much code or anything like that. And then at the tail end there, I covered the OpenAI and AI agent nodes. The real value of N8N in comparison to most other no-code tools, in addition to its ability to self-host, is their AI agent functionality that just works fresh out of the box. So rest assured, we're going to be covering a lot more of that moving forward. But we built a very simple example where I essentially asked my AI agent what was going on for the day, and then it pulled data from my calendar intelligently, while also still being able to talk back and forth in natural language. We covered some nodes that modify flows as well, including the if, the filter, the merge, the split into batches or bundles. We covered the split out. And then finally, we also covered, while I was building that last example, the limit. And then from there, I showed you guys how to build a super simple and easy, essentially email autoresponder type flow, but one that does a very high leverage, high value business purpose, which is parsing out, defining whether a journalist inquiry is relevant to us or not. Then if it is, actually writing out an example based off of a template. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and I can already tell that my voice is starting to go, so I'm probably going to call it there. But if anybody has any questions about this, just leave them down below. And if you guys have any suggestions for future videos on N8N or some other no-code topic, then please send them over. Do all that fun YouTube stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all in the next video. Thanks.